The desert stretched endlessly under a sky so vast it made men feel like insects. Raven Hollow Plantation sat in a valley between red mesas, a scar of human ambition carved into land that had belonged to the Navajo and Apache long before any white man claimed it. The main house rose 3 stories high, built from adobe and timber hauled from Santa Fe, its windows like empty eyes watching over fields where cotton struggled against the dry soil. Around it, wooden quarters housed 63 enslaved men and women, their lives measured in sunrise and sunset, in the weight of cotton sacks and the crack of leather whips. Abel was 32 years old, though he looked older. His hands were calloused, thick as tree bark, his back marked with scars that told stories he never spoke aloud. He had been born in Georgia, sold at 12, moved west when his master lost him in a card game to Marcus Holloway, the man who now owned Raven Hollow. Abel had learned to keep his head down, to work until his muscles screamed, to swallow rage like bitter medicine. But he had also learned to watch, to listen, to remember everything. That evening, the air felt wrong. Abel noticed it first as the sun began its descent, painting the desert in shades of copper and blood. The heat that had pressed down all day lifted suddenly, replaced by something cooler, almost electric. The birds that usually wheeled overhead had disappeared. Tell me in the comments which country you are from and what you thought of this story. And if this story made an impression on you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future stories. Even the insects had gone quiet. You feel that? Silas asked, straightening from his row. He was younger than Abel, maybe 20, with quick hands and quicker feet. He had tried to run twice before the dogs caught him. Abel nodded, scanning the horizon. Storm coming, maybe, but there were no clouds. The sky was clear, that deep blue that came just before darkness, stars already beginning to prick through like holes in cloth. Abel had seen desert storms before, had watched walls of dust roll across the land like living things. But this felt different. His skin prickled with awareness, ancient instinct whispering warnings his conscious mind couldn't interpret. The overseers had gathered near the main house, their voices carrying across the fields. There were 4 of them. Taggart, the head overseer with a belly like a barrel and eyes like chips of flint, Brennan and Cole, brothers who enjoyed their work too much, and Wesley the youngest, who sometimes looked uncomfortable when the whip came out, but never said anything to stop it. "Get back to work," Taggart bellowed, though the light was already fading and they'd be called in soon anyway. "Ain't paying you to stand around gawking. We ain't paid at all," Abel thought, but he bent back to his task, fingers moving automatically through the cotton bolls. Beside him, Silas did the same, but his eyes kept darting toward the sky. That's when it happened. A light appeared in the western sky, brilliant and white, moving faster than anything Abel had ever seen. It wasn't like a shooting star, which fell straight and quick. This thing moved with purpose, carving a path across the heavens, leaving a trail of fire in its wake. The sound came seconds later, a roar that built and built until it felt like the air itself was screaming. Abel dropped his sack. All across the fields, people stopped working, heads tilted back, mouths open in wonder and terror. The light grew brighter, closer, and now Abel could see it wasn't steady but pulsing, like a heartbeat made visible. It reminded him of stories his grandmother had told him when he was small. Stories about spirits that walked between worlds, about signs and omens. The object passed directly overhead, low enough that Abel felt heat wash over his upturned face. And then it was falling, somewhere beyond the eastern fields, where the mesquite trees grew thick and the land turned to broken stone and sand. The impact shook the ground beneath his feet, a deep boom that rolled across the valley like thunder. A column of dust and smoke rose into the darkening sky. For a moment everything was silent, even the wind had stopped. Then chaos erupted. "What in the name of Christ was that?" Brennan shouted, his voice high and tight with fear. The overseers had scattered when the thing passed over, diving for cover, and now they stood brushing dust from their clothes with shaking hands. Taggart recovered first, his face flushed red. "Get everyone inside, now! Nobody goes near that thing, you hear me? Nobody!" But people were already moving, drawn toward the impact site despite the danger, despite common sense. Abel found himself walking that direction too, pulled by curiosity stronger than caution. Around him, others did the same, a slow tide of humanity moving toward the unknown. "I said get back!" Taggart's whip cracked the air, but even he didn't sound convinced. His eyes kept darting toward the smoke column, and his hands trembled as he coiled the leather. Marcus Holloway emerged from the main house, his white suit somehow still pristine despite the dust that hung in the air. He was a tall man, rail-thin, with grey hair swept back from a high forehead and a mouth that seemed permanently twisted in displeasure. Behind him came his wife, Catherine, clutching a shawl around her shoulders, and their daughter, Elizabeth, who was 15 and often watched the fields from her bedroom window with an expression Abel couldn't read. "What happened?" Holloway demanded, his voice cutting through the confusion. "Someone better have an answer right now." "Something fell from the sky, sir," Wesley said, the words tumbling out. "We all saw it. Big as a house, maybe bigger, moving faster than anything natural. It came down in the east quarter, past the mesquite grove." Holloway's face went pale. "A meteor?" "Moved like it had a mind, sir," Taggart said quietly. "Meteors don't do that." For a long moment, Holloway stared toward the smoke column, now beginning to dissipate in the evening breeze. Then he turned to Taggart. "Take Brennan and Cole. Go see what it is. But carefully, understand? I don't want anyone getting hurt on account of some space rock. Sir, with respect, maybe we should wait until morning." "I said go!" Holloway's voice cracked like his own whip. "I want to know what's on my land." The three overseers exchanged glances but obeyed, gathering lanterns and rifles before heading east. Abel watched them go, saw the reluctance in their steps, the way they stayed close together like children afraid of the dark. Around him, the other slaves were being herded back toward their quarters, but nobody moved with any urgency. Everyone kept looking toward the east, toward whatever had fallen from the sky. Abel was almost to the door of his quarters when he heard it. At first, he thought it was his imagination, his mind playing tricks after the shock of what they'd witnessed. But no, there it was again, a sound like humming, deep and resonant, coming from the direction of the impact site. It wasn't quite mechanical, wasn't quite organic. It reminded him of the sound his grandmother had made when she sang the old songs, the ones from before the chains, except this was deeper, older, vast beyond comprehension. "You hear that?" Silas whispered beside him. Others were nodding, looking around with wide eyes. "Get inside!" Wesley shouted, but his heart wasn't in it. He heard it too. Abel could see it in his face. Abel lay on his rough mattress that night, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Around him, others tossed and turned, murmuring in their fitful dreams. The humming continued, sometimes so faint it might have been imagination, sometimes loud enough to feel in his chest. And there was something else now, something underneath the hum, a rhythm like a heartbeat, steady and patient. Just before dawn, screaming woke the entire compound. Abel bolted upright, heart hammering, and joined the rush of people spilling out into the grey pre-dawn light. Near the main house, people were gathering in a cluster, voices raised in alarm and horror. Abel pushed through the crowd and stopped cold. Taggart lay on the ground, his body sprawled in the dust, his eyes open but clouded over with a milky white film that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. His skin had gone pale as parchment, lips blue, and when Abel stepped closer, he could see frost on the overseer's clothes, despite the desert warmth already building in the air. "Don't touch him!" Holloway shouted, emerging from the house still in his nightclothes. "Nobody touch him until we know what killed him." But it was obvious Taggart was dead, had been for hours probably. The question was how and why he looked like he'd frozen to death in the middle of the New Mexico desert in summer. Brennan and Cole stood nearby, their faces grey with shock, rifles clutched tight against their chests like talismans against evil. Wesley knelt beside Taggart's body, his hand hovering over the dead man's face, but not quite touching. "What happened out there?" Holloway demanded, his voice shaking. "What did you see?" Brennan opened his mouth, but no sound came out at first. He swallowed hard, tried again. "The crater, sir. It was wrong. The ground around it was smooth like glass, and the hole went down deep, so deep we couldn't see the bottom even with the lanterns. And the sound, that humming, it was coming from down there, like something breathing. We didn't go close," Cole added quickly. "Taggart, he wanted to look over the edge. We told him not to, sir. We did, but he said we were being cowards. He got right up to the rim and looked down, and then—" He shuddered. Then he started shaking like he was having some kind of fit, fell backward, and when we got to him, his eyes were like that, all white and glowing. We carried him back, but he was already cold, already gone. Catherine Holloway had emerged from the house now, Elizabeth beside her. The girl stared at Taggart's body with an expression somewhere between fascination and horror. Other slaves gathered at a distance, watching, whispering among themselves. "Cover him," Holloway ordered. "Get him inside and cover him, and nobody, and I mean nobody, goes near that crater. Wesley, ride to Santa Fe. Tell them we need soldiers, need someone from the territorial government. Tell them—" He paused, seeming to realize how insane this would sound. "Tell them we have a situation that requires immediate attention." Wesley nodded and hurried toward the stables. The sun was rising now, painting the desert in shades of gold and red, but the beauty of it felt hollow, mocking. Abel could still hear that hum, that rhythmic pulse, and now that he was listening for it, he realized it had woven itself into the fabric of the morning, as constant as his own heartbeat. The slaves were sent to work despite everything, though no one was sent to the eastern fields. They stayed west, near the main house, where the overseers could watch them. But concentration was impossible. Every few minutes someone would stop, head cocked, listening to that sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Around midday, someone screamed. Abel spun around to see Miriam, an older woman who worked in the main house, pointing toward the nearest cotton field. The plants there had changed. Where yesterday they had been the usual dirty white, now they were black, black as coal, black as night, the bowls shriveled and twisted like burned flesh. The transformation seemed to be spreading even as they watched, darkness creeping through the rows like spilled ink. "Sweet Jesus," Silas breathed. "What's happening?" Others were noticing now, voices rising in alarm. Brennan fired his rifle into the air, trying to restore order, but panic was taking hold. People backed away from the blackened cotton, as if it might reach out and grab them. Holloway strode into the field, his face set in stubborn denial. He grabbed one of the blackened bowls, pulled it free, and immediately dropped it with a curse. "It's ice cold," he said, staring at his hand. "The whole plant is frozen solid." But that was impossible. The sun beat down mercilessly, the temperature easily over 90 degrees. Yet when Abel crept closer, he could see frost glittering on the twisted leaves. By evening, half the cotton crop had turned black. The well water had started doing something strange too, shimmering and moving, even when no one touched it, forming patterns on the surface that looked almost like writing in a language no one could read. The horses in the stable refused to eat, stamping and rolling their eyes white with fear. And that night, the singing started. Abel heard it first in his dreams, except he wasn't sure he was dreaming. The sound wove through his consciousness, voices that seemed to come from the sky itself, high and ethereal, forming melodies that made his chest ache with emotions he couldn't name. Sorrow was in it, yes, but also longing, and something else, something that felt like recognition, like being called home after a long journey. He opened his eyes to find he wasn't alone. Others sat up in their beds, tears streaming down their faces, all of them hearing the same thing. The singing filled the night, beautiful and terrible, and Abel found himself standing, walking to the door, compelled by something stronger than fear. Outside, dozens of people stood in the moonlight, faces upturned, listening to the impossible choir. The sound seemed to be coming from the direction of the crater, but also from above, from the stars themselves. And now Abel could make out words, or something like words, in a language he didn't know, but somehow understood. They sang of falling, of impact, of being so far from home. They sang of searching and waiting and watching. "Get back inside," Cole shouted, but his voice was weak, almost pleading. He heard it too, they all did. Even Holloway stood on his porch, staring at the sky with an expression of wonder and terror. The singing continued until dawn, and when it finally faded, everyone who had heard it felt hollowed out, emptied, as if something essential had been pulled from their souls and not quite returned. 3 days after the impact, 2 more men died. One was Brennan, found in the barn with his eyes clouded white like Taggart's, frost on his eyelashes despite the suffocating heat. The other was Samuel, one of the slaves, who had been sent to fetch water from a creek near the eastern boundary. They found him face down in the stream bed, the water around him frozen solid, his mouth open as if he'd been singing. Wesley hadn't returned from Santa Fe. Holloway sent Cole to find out what happened, but Cole made it only 5 miles before his horse refused to go farther, rearing and screaming, until Cole gave up and came back. Something was wrong with the land itself, people whispered. The desert was rejecting them, pushing them back toward Raven Hollow, toward whatever lay in that crater. Abel had started having visions. He would be working, hands moving through the cotton, when suddenly he would see things that weren't there. Vast darkness filled with lights like stars, movement through emptiness, the sensation of falling that lasted years or centuries, or maybe just seconds. He wasn't alone. Others described similar experiences, moments when reality seemed to slip sideways and show them glimpses of something beyond comprehension. The blackened cotton had spread to encompass nearly all the fields now. Holloway had ordered it burned, but fire wouldn't take. The flames would start, then gutter and die, as if the plants were sucking the heat right out of the air. So the blackened stalks stood like a burned forest, crackling in the wind, and at night they almost seemed to move, to reach toward the sky. "We need to leave," Catherine Holloway said one evening, her voice carrying through the open windows of the main house. Abel was nearby, collecting tools, and he paused to listen. "Marcus, please, whatever that thing is, it's killing people. We should go to Santa Fe, get help, and abandon everything I've built?" Holloway's voice was sharp, defensive. "This plantation is my life, Catherine, our life. I won't just walk away because some meteor fell and people are getting superstitious." "Superstitious?" Her laugh was brittle, edged with hysteria. "Marcus, the cotton turned black. The water moves by itself. We all hear that singing every night. This isn't superstition. This is something real and terrible, and we need to leave before it kills us all." A long silence followed. Then Holloway spoke again. Quieter now. "2 more days. If Wesley doesn't come back with help in 2 more days, we'll consider evacuating. But I'm not abandoning my property without exhausting every option." Abel moved away before they could notice him, but Catherine's words echoed in his mind. 2 more days. Would they even have 2 more days? Every night, the singing grew louder, more insistent. Every morning, someone else reported strange dreams, visions of falling through endless dark, of voices speaking in languages that predated human speech. That night, Abel made a decision. He had to see the crater, had to understand what had come from the sky. The overseers were too frightened to enforce discipline properly now. Everyone moving through their days like ghosts, waiting for whatever was going to happen next. It wouldn't be difficult to slip away after dark. He told Silas his plan, expecting argument, but the younger man just nodded. "I'm coming with you," he said simply. "I've been dreaming about it, about going there. Like something's calling me." "Me too," said Ruth, an older woman who worked in the laundry. I think it wants us to see it." By the time night fell, a dozen people had volunteered to make the journey. Abel tried to talk some of them out of it, especially the older folks and the children, but they were all determined. The singing had started again, filling the darkness with its strange harmonies, and it pulled at them all like a tide pulls at the shore. They moved through the blackened cotton fields like shadows, the twisted plants rustling around them with a sound like whispered secrets. The moon was nearly full, providing enough light to see by, and Abel noticed that the frost on the blackened cotton gleamed silver, making the whole field shimmer like a frozen lake. The mesquite grove loomed ahead, gnarled trees casting weird shadows. Abel pushed through the brush, thorns catching at his clothes, until suddenly the ground fell away before them. The crater spread out like a wound in the earth, maybe 50 feet across, perfectly circular, its edges smooth as glass. The bottom was lost in darkness, though Abel thought he could see a faint glow down there, pulsing in rhythm with that constant hum. "Lord, have mercy," Ruth whispered. "What is it?" Abel stepped closer to the edge, his heart hammering. The hum grew louder, resonating in his bones, and now he could feel it pulling at him, inviting him, welcoming him. He leaned forward, peering into the depths, and that's when he saw them. Lights, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, moving in the darkness at the bottom of the crater. They pulsed and swirled in patterns that hurt to look at, geometries that shouldn't exist, colors his eyes couldn't quite process. And among the lights, shapes moved, forms that might have been technological or biological or something that transcended both categories. The singing intensified, no longer coming from the sky but from the crater itself, and Abel realized with a shock that made his legs weak that he could understand it now. The voices sang of journey and purpose, of watching and waiting. They sang of finding what they had searched for, of recognition and reunion. They sang of coming home. "It's calling to us," Silas said, his voice dreamy and distant. He took a step toward the crater's edge. "Don't you feel it? It knows us. It's been looking for us." Abel grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "No, whatever it is. We don't know if it's safe." But even as he said it, he felt the pull growing stronger. Part of him wanted to climb down into that crater, to go to the lights and the voices, to finally understand what all of this meant. It felt like remembering something he'd forgotten long ago, something essential about who and what he was. "Look!" Ruth pointed at the crater's rim. Symbols were appearing on the smooth glass surface, glowing faintly silver in the moonlight. They looked like writing, but in no alphabet Abel had ever seen, flowing and organic, beautiful in their alienness. "It's the same as on the cotton," someone said. "The patterns in the water, it's writing to us." "But writing what?" Abel asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer. The singing reached a crescendo, and suddenly the lights in the crater surged upward, shooting toward the surface in a fountain of impossible radiance. Everyone stumbled back, shielding their eyes, as the lights spread out across the desert like seeds scattered on wind. They moved with purpose, flowing toward Raven Hollow, toward the main house and the quarters and the blackened fields. Abel ran. They all ran, crashing back through the mesquite grove, thorns tearing at their skin. Behind them, the lights followed, not chasing but accompanying, moving alongside them like curious companions. The singing surrounded them, filled them, and Abel found himself laughing and crying at the same time, overwhelmed by emotions too complex to name. They burst out of the grove to find Raven Hollow transformed. The lights had arrived before them. Hundreds of them now, floating through the air like luminescent seeds, touching buildings and people and crops. Where they touched, the glowing symbols appeared, writing themselves into existence on wood and stone and flesh. People screamed and ran, but there was nowhere to go. The lights were everywhere, filling the night with their eerie radiance. Abel stood frozen, watching as one of the lights drifted toward him, its glow pulsing in time with his heartbeat. He should have been terrified, should have run like the others, but he felt only a strange calm, a sense of inevitability. The light touched his chest, and the world exploded into meaning. He saw everything, the journey across unimaginable distances, falling through the spaces between stars, the purpose that had driven that journey, the search for something precious and lost. Recognition flooding through alien consciousness, the joy of finding what had been sought for so long. And underneath it all, a message, simple and profound. We have found you. We have come home. You are not what you believe you are. Abel gasped, stumbling backward, the vision fading, but its echo remaining burned into his mind. Around him, others who had been touched by the lights stood with similar expressions of shock and wonder. The symbols on their skin glowed softly, writing they couldn't read but somehow understood. "What did you see?" Silas asked, his voice shaking. A symbol blazed on his forehead, intricate and beautiful. "The truth," Abel said, though he wasn't sure what that meant. I think it showed me the truth." Gunfire cracked through the night. Holloway stood on his porch, firing his rifle at the lights, his face twisted with rage and fear. "Get off my land! Whatever you are, you're not wanted here. This is my property." The lights ignored him, continuing their dance through the air, touching person after person, leaving their glowing marks. Catherine had collapsed on the porch, symbols covering her arms and face, while Elizabeth stood in the yard, looking up at the lights with an expression of transcendent wonder. "Father," she called out, her voice strange and resonant. "Father, stop fighting. They're not here to hurt us. They're here to remember." "Remember what?" Holloway screamed. "Remember what, damn you?" But Elizabeth didn't answer. She was singing now, her voice joining with the voices from the crater, and others began to sing with her, creating harmonies that shouldn't have been possible for human throats. Abel felt his own voice rising to join them, words he didn't know flowing out of him, and with each note, more memories flooded his mind. Memories that weren't his own. Memories of before the chains, before the ships, before even humanity as he understood it. Memories of light and song and falling through the stars. By morning, every living soul on Raven Hollow bore the marks. The glowing symbols covered skin and clothing, walls and tools, marking everything they touched with meanings that existed beyond language. Holloway had barricaded himself in his study, refusing to come out, but his screams echoed through the house as whatever he'd seen when the lights touched him drove him slowly mad. Abel stood in the center of the compound, watching the sun rise over the blackened fields, and felt different, changed. The memories that weren't memories continued to flow through him in waves, showing him things his conscious mind struggled to process. He saw himself differently now, saw all of them differently. They weren't just slaves and masters, victims and oppressors. They were something older, something that had been sleeping, waiting, scattered across the earth in forms that had forgotten their true nature. "The stars," Ruth said beside him, her voice distant and dreamy. "We came from the stars, didn't we? Before we were this, we were something else." Abel nodded slowly. It sounded insane, impossible. Yet the knowledge sat in his mind, with the weight of absolute truth. They had been scattered, seeded across the earth in the forms of humans, their true nature hidden even from themselves. But something had been searching for them, tracking them across centuries and continents, and now it had found them at last. "Is that thing in the crater?" Silas started, then stopped, struggling for words. "Is it us? Or are we it?" "Both," Elizabeth said, approaching from the main house. The symbols on her skin pulsed with light as she moved. "Neither. It's complicated. Time doesn't work the way we think it does. Cause and effect get tangled when you're dealing with things that exist outside normal space." She spoke with an authority that shouldn't have belonged to a 15-year-old girl. But Abel understood. The lights had given her knowledge, just as they'd given it to all of them, filling the empty spaces in their minds with understanding that felt both alien and intimately familiar. "Your father," Abel said carefully. "Is he—" "He's fighting it," Elizabeth replied, sadness in her voice. The lights showed him the same truths they showed us, but he can't accept them. Can't accept that his entire understanding of the world, of his place in it, was built on lies. It's breaking him. A scream tore through the morning air, raw and agonized. Cole emerged from the barn, stumbling, clutching his head. Symbols blazed across his face and hands, so bright they seemed to burn. "Make it stop," he howled. "Make it stop showing me. I don't want to see." He ran toward the desert, still screaming, and disappeared into the heat shimmer. No one went after him. They all understood what he was running from, the terrible weight of revelation, the price of seeing yourself clearly for the first time. "Some of us won't survive this," Ruth said quietly. "Some minds aren't strong enough to hold these truths." "Maybe that's why they stayed hidden for so long," Abel suggested. "Maybe humanity wasn't ready. Maybe we're still not ready, but ready or not, the change was upon them." Throughout the day, more people began to exhibit strange abilities. Sarah, who worked in the kitchen, found she could move objects without touching them, lifting pots and pans through will alone. Thomas discovered he could see through solid objects, his gaze penetrating walls and earth. The symbols on their bodies pulsed and shifted, rearranging themselves into new patterns, writing new possibilities into reality. Abel's own gift emerged slowly. He found he could sense the thoughts and feelings of others, not clearly like words, but as impressions, emotional colors that painted the air around each person. Fear glowed sickly yellow, wonder shone bright blue, and underneath everything, a deep purple resonance that connected them all, a network of consciousness stretching between every marked individual. "We're linking," he realized aloud, "becoming something collective. The way we were before," Elizabeth agreed. "Before we fragmented, before we forgot. The crash, the impact, it wasn't an accident. It was a beacon, a call to wake up and remember." But not everyone wanted to wake up. That evening, Holloway finally emerged from his study, and the man who stepped out bore little resemblance to the plantation owner who had gone in. His hair had gone completely white, his face gaunt and aged decades in a single day. The symbols on his skin writhed like living things, and his eyes held a terrible knowledge that had cost him his sanity. "I understand now," he said, his voice cracked and broken. "I understand what we did, what I did. The chains, the whips, the buying and selling of souls. But you weren't just humans, were you? You were pieces of something greater, something I kept locked in bondage. And I didn't even know, couldn't have known. But that doesn't matter, does it? The crime remains, even if I couldn't see its full scope." He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "All my life I believed I was superior, that I had the right to own other people because of my skin, my birth, my position. And now I see that we're all fragments of the same being, scattered and lost, and I've been torturing pieces of myself, haven't I? Haven't I?" "Mr. Holloway," Abel started, but the man held up a shaking hand. "No. Don't try to comfort me. Don't try to forgive me. What I've done is unforgivable, even if you are merciful enough to offer pardon. The light showed me everything, every lash, every separation of families, every moment of suffering multiplied across decades. And they showed me that you felt it all more deeply than ordinary humans ever could, because part of you always remembered what you really were, what we stole from you." Tears ran down his face, cutting tracks through the glowing symbols. "I'm sorry. God help me, I'm so sorry, but sorry isn't enough, is it? Nothing could ever be enough." He walked toward the crater, his steps steady despite his trembling. Catherine called after him, but he didn't stop. Abel felt the pull of the man's emotions through their nascent link, tasted the depth of his guilt and horror, and understood what Holloway intended to do. "Should we stop him?" Silas asked quietly. Abel shook his head. "I don't think we could, even if we wanted to. He's made his choice." They watched as Marcus Holloway disappeared into the mesquite grove, heading toward the crater that had destroyed his world and revealed the truth he couldn't bear to face. No one followed. They simply stood in silence, feeling through their connection the moment when he reached the rim, the moment when he looked down into the depths and saw the lights swirling in their alien geometries, the moment when he stepped forward and fell into revelation. The singing that night was different, touched with sorrow and acceptance. The lights rose from the crater again, but gentler this time, moving through Raven Hollow like a blessing rather than an invasion. They settled over the buildings and the fields, over the people gathered in silent vigil, and everywhere they touched, things began to change more rapidly. The blackened cotton shimmered and transformed, the plants restructuring themselves at a molecular level, becoming something new and strange, stems crystalline, and leaves that caught starlight and glowed. The buildings began to shift too, wood and adobe flowing like liquid, rearranging into structures that followed geometries unknown to earthly architecture. Raven Hollow was being remade, shaped by the collective unconscious of those who dwelled within it, guided by the lights that had come from the stars. "It's beautiful," Elizabeth whispered, and it was. Terrible and beautiful and utterly alien, a glimpse of what they had been before they fell, before they forgot, before they became human and bound themselves with chains both literal and metaphorical. Abel felt his own body beginning to change, felt the symbols sinking deeper than skin, rewriting him at some fundamental level. It didn't hurt. If anything, it felt like relief, like shrugging off a coat that had always been too tight, too small, too confining. Around him, others were transforming too, their forms becoming fluid, uncertain, possibilities rather than fixed realities. "What's happening to us?" someone asked, their voice rippling with harmonics. "We're waking up," Abel answered, and knew it was true. "We're finally waking up." Wesley returned a week after Holloway's death, bringing with him a contingent of soldiers from Santa Fe and a territorial official named Hawthorne. They stopped at the edge of the blackened fields, their horses refusing to go farther, and stared in disbelief at what Raven Hollow had become. The plantation barely resembled its former self. The buildings had transformed into structures that seemed to grow from the earth rather than being built upon it, organic architecture that breathed and pulsed with inner light. The fields no longer held cotton, but crystalline growths that sang in the wind, harmonizing with the voices that still echoed from the crater. And the people, when they emerged to greet the newcomers, looked almost human, but not quite. Their skin marked with glowing symbols that shifted and changed, their movements too fluid, their eyes holding depths that human eyes shouldn't contain. Abel approached the soldiers, feeling their fear through the psychic link that now connected all those who had been touched by the lights. He tried to project calm, tried to show them there was no danger, but their terror was too deep, too primal. They saw monsters where he stood, demons wearing human skin, and no amount of reassurance could bridge that gap of understanding. "Dear God," Hawthorne breathed, his face pale. "Wesley, you said there was an incident, but what happened here?" "Something fell from the sky," Wesley explained, his voice shaking. "I left before the worst of it, before everything changed. I told you we needed help, but I didn't think—" He trailed off, staring at the transformed landscape. "I didn't think it would be like this." "Where is Marcus Holloway?" Hawthorne demanded. "I need to speak with the owner of this property." "Mr. Holloway is dead," Elizabeth said, stepping forward. The symbols on her skin pulsed brighter as she moved, and several soldiers made warding gestures as if facing down evil. "He walked into the crater and didn't come back. My mother leads now, such as leading means anything anymore." "Your mother? Catherine Holloway?" "She's changed," Elizabeth said simply. "We've all changed. The lights from the crater, they showed us what we really are, what we've always been. We're not what you think we are. None of us ever were. Hawthorne's hand moved to his pistol, though he didn't draw it. Is this some kind of slave revolt? Have the workers here gone mad and murdered their master? Abel felt anger flash through him, hot and bright, but he pushed it down. These men couldn't understand, not without being touched by the lights themselves, and he wasn't sure their minds could survive such contact. Some humans were more receptive than others, more able to accept the impossible truths that the crater revealed. These soldiers, rigid in their beliefs and certainties, would probably break like Holloway had. This isn't a revolt, Abel said carefully. This is something bigger than that. Bigger than slavery or freedom or any of the categories you use to organize your world. Something has been awakened here, something that's been sleeping for a very long time. We're not a threat to you or anyone else. We just want to be left alone to complete our transformation. Transformation into what? Hawthorne demanded. Into what we were always meant to be, Ruth answered, emerging from one of the restructured buildings. Her form flickered slightly as she moved, as if she existed in multiple states simultaneously. Before we fell, before we were scattered, before we forgot ourselves and became lost in the dream of human existence. The soldiers backed their horses away, weapons raised now, fear overcoming discipline. Wesley looked torn between duty and terror. His loyalty to Holloway warring with his instinct to flee from whatever these people had become. I'm going to recommend that Santa Fe quarantine this entire area, Hawthorne said, his voice tight. No one in or out until we can determine what exactly is happening here and whether it poses a threat to the territory. You can try, Elizabeth said, and there was something ancient in her young voice, something that had watched civilizations rise and fall across the stars. But your quarantine won't work. The changes happening here are spreading, slowly but inevitably. The crater was just the beginning, the first awakening. Others will follow. Others are already following. She pointed toward the horizon, and Abel saw what she meant. In the distance, more lights fell from the sky, dozens of them, hundreds, streaking across the daylight like meteor showers made of consciousness. They fell in patterns across New Mexico and beyond, each one a beacon, each one a call to others like them who still slept in human forms, still dreamed they were something they weren't. This is happening everywhere, Elizabeth continued. We're waking up across the whole world, remembering what we are, what we came from. You can't stop it any more than you can stop the sunrise. The question is whether you'll fight against it or accept it and learn to live alongside what we're becoming. Hawthorne's face had gone from pale to grey. This is madness. Absolute madness. You're telling me that some kind of alien invasion is happening, that people are being transformed into what? Not an invasion, Abel corrected gently. A homecoming. We were here first, long before Homo sapiens evolved. We seeded this world with life, with possibility, and then we fell asleep inside our own creation, forgot ourselves, became the humans you see around you. But we were always here, always waiting, and now something has come to wake us up. I don't believe in fairy tales, Hawthorne spat. I believe in law and order, and the authority of the United States government. Whatever's happened here, whatever disease or madness has taken hold, it will be contained and treated. You're all under quarantine as of this moment. Anyone attempting to leave will be shot. Abel felt sadness ripple through the psychic network that connected all those who had been transformed. These men couldn't understand, couldn't see beyond the walls of their limited perception. They would fight against the inevitable, cause suffering for themselves and others, all because they clung to certainties that were crumbling around them. Go back to Santa Fe, Catherine Holloway said, emerging from the transformed main house. She looked younger than she had a week ago, the stress and age that slavery and complicity had carved into her features, smoothed away by the changes wrought by the lights. Tell them what you saw here. Tell them to prepare, not for war, but for transformation. Some of your people will be like us, will carry the seed of what we truly are. When the lights find them, when they begin to wake up, they'll need guidance, need others who understand what they're going through. We can provide that if you'll let us." "I'll do no such thing," Hawthorne said, but his voice wavered. "I'll tell them to send the army, to burn this place to the ground if necessary." "Then you'll fail," Catherine said simply. "You can't burn away truth, no matter how much it frightens you. The transformation is already spreading, already touching people in Santa Fe, in Mexico City, in Washington. Soon there will be more of us than there are of you, and the world will change whether you accept it or not." The soldiers retreated, horses dancing nervously, and Abel watched them go with mixed feelings. Part of him wanted to call them back, to explain more clearly, to make them understand that this didn't have to be frightening, that the awakening could be beautiful if people would just let go of their fear. But he knew it was useless. Understanding would come in time, but first there would be resistance, violence, suffering. Humanity rarely accepted change gracefully. That night, more lights came. They filled the sky like stars falling upward, each one seeking its counterpart on the ground, finding those who carried the dormant seed of otherness within them. Abel watched through his expanded consciousness as people across the territory began to transform, as symbols blazed on skin from Albuquerque to Taos, as the network of awakened minds grew larger and more complex. He felt each new connection like a note in an endless symphony, each consciousness adding its unique harmonics to the growing song. They were remembering together, piecing together a history that spanned eons, a purpose that had been forgotten in the long sleep of human existence. "Do you remember why we came here?" Silas asked, standing beside Abel on what used to be the porch of his quarters. "To Earth, I mean, before we fell asleep and became human." Abel reached into the deep memories the lights had unlocked, sifting through knowledge that predated language. "We were explorers, I think. Seeders of life. We would find worlds with potential and plant the seeds of consciousness, then move on to the next world. But something went wrong here. We got trapped in our own creation, caught in the cycle of birth and death, bound by flesh and time. And the thing in the crater, the ship or entity or whatever it is. A rescue mission," Ruth said, joining them. "Or maybe a awakening mechanism. It's hard to tell with memories this old, this strange. Time works differently for what we really are. Past and future, cause and effect, it all blurs together when you're not limited by 3 dimensions and linear existence." "So what happens now?" Silas asked. "When we're all awake, when we've all remembered what we are?" "I don't know," Abel admitted. "The memories show me what we were, but the future is still unwritten. We get to choose what we become, what we do with this awakening. We're not bound by our old purpose anymore. We're something new now, something that's been shaped by human experience and suffering and joy." He thought about the chains he'd worn, the scars on his back, the years of bondage and pain. Those experiences had been real, had shaped him in ways that couldn't be erased even by the revelation of his true nature. He was more than the alien consciousness that had seeded Earth millions of years ago. He was also Abel, slave, survivor, witness to humanity's capacity for both cruelty and transcendence. "Maybe that's the point," Elizabeth said, seeming to follow his thoughts through their connection. "Maybe we were meant to become human for a while, to experience limitation and mortality, to understand what it means to suffer and struggle and hope against hope. Maybe that was never an accident or a trap, but a transformation we chose. Or maybe we're just trying to find meaning in trauma," Catherine added, her voice tired. "Maybe there is no grand purpose, no divine plan. Maybe we just fell and forgot, and now we're waking up into a universe that doesn't care either way." Or the singing from the crater intensified, as if in response to their words, and Abel felt a surge of emotion through the network, complex and multi-layered. The consciousness in the crater, the one that had come from the stars to wake them, was itself changed by contact with human experience. It had been cold before, pure purpose without context, but now it carried echoes of everything it had touched, every life it had awakened. It was becoming more than it had been, just as they all were. The army arrived 3 weeks later, 200 soldiers with cannons and rifles, led by a colonel named Breckinridge, who had orders to contain the incident at Raven Hollow by any means necessary. They set up camp at the edge of the transformed zone, where normal desert met the spreading crystalline growths, and spent days observing, documenting, trying to understand what they faced. Abel could feel their presence like pressure against his consciousness, feel their fear and confusion and the orders they'd been given that conflicted with what their eyes told them. Some of the soldiers carried the seed, he realized. Some of them were like him, sleeping, others waiting to be awakened. When the lights came for them, as they inevitably would, the army's unity would shatter. Colonel Breckinridge called for a parley, and Catherine agreed, though Abel could sense her reluctance. They met in the no-man's land between the camp and the transformed plantation. A dozen soldiers facing a handful of the awakened, the gulf between their realities wider than the physical space separating them. "Mrs. Holloway," Breckinridge began, his military bearing rigid and formal, "I've been sent to investigate reports of unnatural occurrences at this location and to restore order as necessary. Can you explain what has transpired here?" Catherine smiled, and Abel saw the colonel flinch at the symbols that pulsed across her face as her expression changed. "Order, Colonel? I'm afraid order, as you understand it, is one of many things that no longer applies here. As for what's transpired, that's a very long story. Shall I start at the beginning, millions of years ago, or would you prefer the abbreviated version?" "I prefer straight answers, ma'am," Breckinridge said stiffly. "What happened to the slaves who worked this plantation? What happened to Marcus Holloway? And what are you people becoming?" "The slaves are free," Catherine answered. "Not because anyone freed them, but because the categories of slave and free don't mean anything anymore. We're all changing, all becoming what we were before we forgot ourselves. As for my husband, he couldn't bear the weight of revelation. He walked into the crater seeking understanding or oblivion, and I suspect he found both. And this crater, my scouts report it's disappeared, swallowed by the ground." "Not disappeared," Abel interjected. "Internalized. It's inside us now, inside everyone who was touched by the lights. We carry it with us, the knowledge and the transformation it brought." Breckinridge's hand rested on his pistol, though he made no move to draw it. "You're asking me to believe in fairy tales. Aliens, transformations, ancient beings sleeping in human form. It's insanity, is it?" Elizabeth stepped forward, and as she did, her form rippled, showing glimpses of what lay beneath the human surface. Light and geometry, consciousness without fixed form, being that existed in more dimensions than 3. "Does your definition of sanity encompass everything that exists, Colonel, or just the narrow band of experience you're comfortable with?" Several soldiers gasped or made warding gestures. Breckinridge went pale, but held his ground. "Whatever you are, you pose a threat to the United States and its citizens. I have orders to contain this threat by any means necessary." "And how do you intend to contain consciousness itself?" Catherine asked. "How do you plan to fight against something that's already inside your own men, waiting to wake up? Look at your soldiers, Colonel. Really look at them. Some of them are like us, carrying the seed of what we truly are. When the next lights fall, when the awakening spreads to your camp, what will your orders be worth then?" Breckinridge's face hardened. "Are you threatening my men?" "No," Abel said quickly. "We're not threatening anyone. But the transformation is spreading whether we will it or not. The lights come from beyond our control, seeking those who carry the ancient patterns in their blood and bone. We can guide those who are changing, help them through the transition, but we can't stop it from happening." "Then I'll stop it," Breckinridge said flatly. "My orders are to contain this situation, and that's exactly what I'll do. You people stay on your side of the boundary. Anyone who crosses will be shot, and if I see any more of those lights, I'll open fire on them too." "You can't shoot light, Colonel," Ruth said gently. "You can't fight consciousness with bullets." All you'll do is cause suffering, delay the inevitable, make the transformation harder than it needs to be. But Breckenridge was already turning away, striding back to his camp with his soldiers following. Abel watched him go and felt a deep sadness. So much resistance, so much fear. The army would fight against the awakening, and people would die because of it, both the transformed and those who remained fully human. The gap between the two realities was too wide, the threat to established order too great. Violence was coming, as inevitable as the sunrise. That night, Abel called a gathering of all those who had fully awakened. They met in the central courtyard of transformed Raven Hollow. Nearly 100 people now, their consciousnesses linked in a network that hummed with shared thought and feeling. The question before them was simple but profound. What would they do when the army attacked, as it surely would? "We could fight," Silas suggested, and Abel felt through their link the younger man's anger at the soldiers who would destroy them simply for being different. "We have abilities they can't match, powers they can't understand. We could sweep through their camp and transform them by force, wake them up whether they want it or not." "That would make us no better than those who enslaved us," Catherine countered. "Force is force, whether applied with chains or with alien consciousness. We can't create a better world by repeating the sins of the old one." "But we can't just let them kill us," someone argued. "We have a right to exist, to complete our transformation. If they attack, we have to defend ourselves." "Defense, yes," Abel agreed, "but not offense. We don't attack first. Don't try to force the awakening on anyone. We protect ourselves and those who seek sanctuary with us, but we don't become conquerors." "Spoken like a slave," a voice said bitterly, and Abel turned to see Marcus, a young man who had been one of the field workers. "They kept us in chains for years, treated us like animals, denied us every freedom. Now we finally have power, finally have the ability to fight back, and you want us to just accept more abuse." "I say we wake them all up, force them to see what we've seen, make them understand what they've done to us. And what if their minds break like Holloway's did?" Elizabeth asked quietly. "What if we destroy them by giving them truth they can't process? Does that make us righteous or just cruel in a different way?" The argument continued, voices rising, opinions clashing through the psychic network. Abel felt the collective consciousness of the awakened fracturing, different philosophies and approaches emerging. Some wanted peaceful coexistence, willing to wait for the transformation to spread naturally. Others demanded immediate action, wanting to force the change and create a new world order overnight. And a few, a troubling few, saw the awakening as an opportunity for revenge, a chance to make those who had oppressed them understand suffering from the inside. "We're becoming them," Abel realized with sudden horror. "We're repeating the same patterns, the same divisions. We're arguing about who has power and how to use it, just like humans have always done. The transformation hasn't made us better, hasn't made us more wise. We're just more powerful versions of the same flawed beings we were before." Silence fell across the gathering as his words rippled through the network. Then Catherine spoke, her voice heavy with accumulated grief. "Maybe that's the real test," she said. "Maybe the awakening isn't about becoming gods or transcending our limitations. Maybe it's about choosing, moment by moment, what kind of beings we want to be. We have power now, yes, but power without wisdom is just destruction in a prettier package." "So, what do we do?" Silas asked. "When the army comes, when they start shooting, what do we do?" "We show them what we could be," Abel answered, the decision crystallizing in his mind. "Not what we were in the ancient past, and not what humans have made us in the present, but what we choose to become in the future. We defend without destroying. We teach without forcing. We transform not through violence, but through example." "That's naive," Marcus spat. "They'll kill you for that kind of idealism." "Maybe," Abel agreed, "but I'd rather die trying to create something new than live by repeating old mistakes." We've been given a chance to start again, to build something better than what came before. If we waste that chance on revenge and domination, what's the point of waking up at all? The vote, when it came, was far from unanimous. A clear majority supported Abel's approach of peaceful resistance, but a significant minority wanted more aggressive action. The network that had seemed so unified began to show cracks, different nodes of consciousness pulling in different directions. Abel felt the fracture like a physical pain and understood that this was only the beginning. The awakened would not remain unified, would not speak with one voice. They were too human for that, still carrying the baggage of individual experience and trauma. But perhaps that was as it should be. Perhaps perfect unity was just another form of tyranny, even when applied to consciousness itself. 3 days later, the lights came again, falling in broad daylight like stars that had gotten lost on their way to night. They fell directly on the army camp, dozens of them, seeking the soldiers who carried the ancient patterns. Breckinridge ordered his men to fire, and for a few chaotic moments, rifles cracked and cannons boomed, but bullets passed through the lights without effect. They were consciousness-given form, immune to physical violence, and they settled over their chosen targets with gentle inevitability. Abel watched from the boundary as soldiers began to transform, symbols blazing across their skin, their screams of fear gradually shifting to songs of wonder. Some fell to their knees, overwhelmed by revelation. Others ran, trying to escape the changes happening within them. A few, like Breckinridge himself, fought against the awakening with such ferocity that their minds broke under the strain, leaving them catatonic, trapped between two states of being. By sunset, half the army had been transformed. The other half had fled, carrying tales of horror and transformation back to Santa Fe, spreading fear and confusion in their wake. The awakened soldiers stumbled toward Raven Hollow, seeking understanding, seeking others who could help them navigate the chaos of new consciousness. Abel and the others welcomed them, guided them, helped them through the first terrible days of remembering what they had been and confronting what they had done as humans. One soldier, a young corporal named Hayes, wept as the memories flooded through him. "I shot a child," he sobbed, symbols pulsing across his face. "Last year in a raid on a Navajo village. I shot a child because my commander ordered me to, because I believed they were savages. Because I didn't know, didn't understand that they were like us, that we're all fragments of the same thing, and I murdered a piece of myself, didn't I? There were no easy comforts to offer, no absolution that could wash away such crimes. All Abel could do was hold the young man while he shook with grief and guilt, let him feel the full weight of his actions now that he had eyes to truly see them. This was the price of awakening, the terrible cost of remembering. You couldn't unknow what you'd done, couldn't unsee your own complicity in the cruelties of the human world. 6 months after the impact, the territory of New Mexico had been declared off-limits by the federal government, though enforcement proved impossible. The transformation continued to spread, lights falling in patterns across North America and beyond, seeking those who carried the ancient consciousness dormant within them. Cities began to show signs of change, buildings restructuring themselves into alien geometries, technology failing or evolving in unpredictable ways as the awakened learned to reshape reality through will alone. Raven Hollow had become a sanctuary, a place where the newly awakened could come to learn and grow and understand what they were becoming. The blackened cotton fields had been transformed into gardens of crystalline beauty, plants that sang in harmonies beyond human hearing, that drew nutrition from sunlight in ways terrestrial biology couldn't match. The buildings housed hundreds now, refugees from a world that feared and hated them, seeking safety among their own kind. But tensions remained. The split between those who wanted peaceful coexistence with unchanged humanity and those who advocated for more aggressive transformation had deepened into an ideological chasm. Marcus had left with a group of like-minded awakened, heading east to force the change on cities and towns, believing that the only path forward was total transformation. They left behind grief and anger, the psychic network damaged by their departure. Abel stood on the highest point of the transformed plantation, looking out over the desert that had birthed so much change, and felt the weight of responsibility settle heavy on his shoulders. He had become, without quite meaning to, a leader among the awakened, his voice carrying authority in councils and gatherings. People looked to him for guidance, for wisdom he wasn't sure he possessed. "Thinking about what comes next?" Catherine asked, joining him on the overlook. She had aged backward in the months since her transformation, her physical form shifting to reflect some idealized self-image. It was disconcerting sometimes, seeing her look younger than her daughter. "Trying to," Abel admitted. "I keep seeing two futures, both terrible in different ways. In one, we fight humanity until one side or the other is destroyed. In the other, we hide, remain separate, let the world fracture into those who are awakened and those who aren't. Neither option feels right." "Maybe neither is right," Catherine suggested. "Maybe we're still thinking in binaries, us versus them, when the reality is more complex. Some humans will never accept the transformation, will fight against it until their dying breath. Others carry the potential, but aren't ready to awaken yet. And some, like us, have already changed and are trying to figure out what that means. Three realities, overlapping, interdependent." "So we build bridges instead of walls," Abel said, understanding dawning. "We find ways for the different realities to coexist, even if they can never fully merge." "Exactly. And we accept that some will always see us as monsters, as threats. We can't control how others perceive us, only how we choose to act." Silas approached, his form flickering between states, still not fully adjusted to his new nature. "You should see this," he said, excitement coloring his voice through the network. "Ruth's been working on something, a way to communicate what we are without forcing the full awakening. She thinks she can create a bridge of understanding." They followed him to what had once been the main house, now transformed into something that looked like a cathedral, designed by alien consciousness. Inside, Ruth stood in the center of a web of light, symbols flowing through the air around her in complex patterns. As Abel watched, the symbols began to coalesce into images, stories told in pure meaning without need for language. "I can encode our experiences into these patterns," Ruth explained, her voice resonant with harmonics. "Humans who see them will understand, at least partially, what we've been through, what we've become. Not the full revelation, which would overwhelm them, but enough to bridge the gap, enough to build empathy. Empathy is a start." Abel agreed, hope kindling in his chest. "If we can make them understand that we're not monsters, not invaders, just beings trying to exist, maybe we can avoid more violence." But even as he spoke, he felt disturbances in the network. Warnings flashing from the awakened who served as scouts. Movement on the horizon, vehicles approaching, more military forces coming to contain what they couldn't understand. The peace, fragile as it was about to be tested again. "How many?" Catherine asked, already moving toward the boundary. "Hundreds," came the reply through the network. "Maybe thousands. This isn't just soldiers. They've brought families, civilians, people who want to witness the awakening for themselves. Some are hostile, but others are curious, seeking. It's chaos out there." Abel rushed to the boundary and felt his breath catch. An enormous crowd stretched across the desert, a mix of soldiers and civilians, the awakened and the unchanged, all converging on Raven Hollow. Some carried weapons, some carried only questions. Flags flew overhead, both American and strange new banners that represented the awakened, symbols in alien languages declaring independence or integration, or concepts that didn't translate to simple political positions. And in the sky above, more lights were falling, hundreds of them, thousands, like a meteor shower made of consciousness itself. The awakening was accelerating, the transformation reaching critical mass. Within hours, maybe days, more people would be changed than left unchanged. Humanity, as it had existed, was ending, not with a whimper or a bang, but with a song in frequencies beyond normal hearing. "This is it," Elizabeth said, standing beside Abel. "The moment everything changes forever. Whatever we do now will shape what comes after." Abel felt the weight of that responsibility, felt the eyes of hundreds of awakened upon him, waiting for guidance. He thought of chains and whips, of the cruelty humans had inflicted on each other in the name of profit and pride. He thought of the crater and the lights and the terrible beauty of revelation. He thought of Holloway, broken by guilt, and Hayes, weeping for the child he'd killed. He thought of all the ways consciousness could be used, for liberation or oppression, for creation or destruction. "We walk out to meet them," he decided, "all of us, together, openly. We show them we're not afraid, not hiding. We offer transformation to those who seek it and peace to those who don't. And if they attack, we defend without destroying. We hold to what we've chosen to be, no matter what it costs." "That's asking a lot," Silas said quietly. "To face violence with peace, hatred with love. Some of us aren't that strong." "Then we lean on each other," Abel replied. "That's what the network is for, to hold each other up when individual strength fails. We're fragments of a whole, remember? Alone we're weak, but together we're something greater than the sum of our parts." They walked out together, hundreds of the awakened moving in loose formation toward the gathered crowd. Abel felt fear rippling through the network, but also determination, hope struggling against despair. Some in the crowd raised weapons, others raised hands in greeting. The lights continued to fall, settling over people seemingly at random, beginning new transformations that would take days or weeks to complete. A shot rang out, then another, bullets kicking up dust around the awakened. Some in the crowd surged forward, aggression overcoming caution, but others held them back, voices raised in argument, in pleading for restraint. The awakened kept walking, slow and steady, making no threatening moves. Abel felt the moment when everything balanced on a knife's edge, when the slightest push could send them toward massacre or toward something new. He reached out through the network, not to the awakened but to those in the crowd who carried the seed, those whose transformation had begun but not yet completed. He touched their nascent consciousness gently, showing them what they could become, what peace might look like between realities, and they responded. Dozens at first, then hundreds, people in the crowd who felt the pull of awakening and chose to answer it rather than fight it. They walked forward to meet the awakened, symbols beginning to glow on their skin, voices rising in the beginnings of song. Family members cried out, some in joy, some in terror, as loved ones transformed before their eyes. The crowd fractured, some fleeing back toward Santa Fe, others pushing forward to join the awakened, still more standing frozen in confusion and fear. The lights swirled overhead, seeking their targets, patient and relentless. The transformation would not be stopped, could not be contained. All that remained was to choose how to meet it, with violence or acceptance, with fear or wonder. Abel stood in the middle of the chaos, linked to hundreds of consciousnesses, feeling the birth pangs of something new. Not human, not entirely alien, but a synthesis of both, shaped by the experiences of bondage and freedom, cruelty and compassion, limitation and transcendence. They were writing a new story, he realized, one where the ending hadn't been determined yet. "It's beautiful," Elizabeth said beside him, tears streaming down her face. "Terrible and beautiful and utterly unprecedented. We're witnessing the birth of a new kind of consciousness, a new way of being, or the death of the old way," Catherine added, "depending on your perspective." "Maybe both," Abel suggested. Every birth is also a death, every transformation a surrender of what was for what might be. The question is whether we can guide this change towards something worth becoming, or whether we'll repeat the same mistakes in different forms. The sun set over the transformed landscape, painting the sky in colors that didn't quite belong to Earth's normal spectrum. The singing grew louder, harmonies complex beyond human composition, and Abel added his voice to the chorus, joining in the song of awakening that stretched across the continent and beyond. They were remembering together all those who had been scattered and lost, finding their way back to each other across the vast darkness of forgetting. But they were also creating something new, something that had never existed before. The ancient consciousness that had seeded Earth millions of years ago had been changed by human experience, tempered by suffering, enriched by the full spectrum of mortal existence. They were not returning to what they had been, but becoming what they had always had the potential to be, synthesis rather than regression. As full darkness fell, Abel looked up at the stars and felt them looking back. The transformation spreading across Earth was not unique, he realized through the deep memories. Other worlds, other species, other fragments of the original consciousness were also awakening, drawn by the same mysterious signal that had brought the lights to New Mexico. They were part of something vast and ancient, a pattern playing out across the universe, consciousness recognizing itself in infinite variations. "What do you think happens when we're all awake?" Silas asked, following Abel's gaze upward. "When every fragment has remembered itself, when consciousness has fully recognized its own nature across every world it's seeded?" "I don't know," Abel admitted. "But I think we're about to find out." The lights continued to fall, patient and inexorable, writing the next chapter of a story that had begun long before humans walked the earth and would continue long after the last human form had transformed into something else. Raven Hollow stood at the center of that transformation, a sanctuary and a warning, a promise of what might be achieved and a reminder of the costs that came with transcendence. Abel felt the weight of history and the pull of future possibilities, and chose to remain standing between them, anchored to the moment, committed to the difficult work of building bridges between realities. They had been given a gift and a burden, the opportunity to shape what came next. Whether they succeeded or failed, whether the awakening led to harmony or chaos, would depend on choices not yet made, on courage not yet tested, on compassion struggling to survive in the face of fear. The desert wind carried the singing across the transformed landscape, voices, human and inhuman, blending into something new. And in that song, if you listened carefully, you could hear both lament for what was lost and hope for what might yet be born. The mystery on Raven Hollow Plantation had not been solved, but multiplied, fracturing into 1,000 questions about identity and reality and the nature of consciousness itself. No one could explain what had fallen from the sky that night, or why it was singing, but everyone who heard that song was changed by it, marked forever by the terrible beauty of revelation. And the singing continued, would continue, a chorus that grew with each awakening, each transformation, each choice to embrace the unknown rather than cling to the comfortable certainties of a world that had never been as solid as it seemed. They were the song and the singers, the question and the answer, fragments becoming whole while remaining somehow themselves. And in that paradox lay both the terror and the promise of what they were becoming. The stars wheeled overhead, patient and ancient, and somewhere in their depths other voices joined the chorus, other consciousnesses awakening to their own nature, all of them part of the same vast pattern, recognizing itself across the infinite darkness. The mystery of Raven Hollow was also the mystery of existence itself, the eternal question of what it means to be conscious, to be alive, to be part of something greater than individual experience, while remaining stubbornly, persistently individual. And no one could explain it, not fully, not finally, not in words that captured the full weight of revelation. All they could do was live it, embody it, become the answer to questions they were only beginning to learn how to ask. The transformation was complete and just beginning, finished and eternal, a single moment stretching across all of time and space, where consciousness recognized itself and sang in wonder at its own existence.